My mother-in-law is a racist. She despised me because I am an Indian. And when she moved in with us, she threw out my groceries and replaced them with national food. For context, I'm Amelia, 32, Indian American, and my fiancé, Henry, is white. We've been together for 3 years, and I thought I knew what I was signing up for. But nothing could have prepared me for Karen. So, here's how it went down. Henry and I were supposed to meet his parents at their home in a small, picturesque town 2 hours from where we live. I was nervous, of course. Henry had talked about his mom being a little opinionated, but he assured me she'd come around once she got to know me. The car ride there was full of pep talks. "She's going to love you," Henry said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, but my stomach was in knots. What if she didn't? What if she took one look at me and decided I wasn't good enough for her son? We pulled into the driveway of a massive, colonial-style house. Everything about it screamed old money. My nerves went up another notch as we walked up the stone pathway to the door. Henry's dad, George, opened it with a warm smile. He gave me a quick hug, saying, "So nice to finally meet you, Amelia," and ushered us inside. Then I saw her, Karen. She was standing at the edge of the living room, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had the kind of face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years, her sharp blue eyes scrutinizing me from head to toe. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore pearls, of all things. Pearls. "Mom, this is Amelia," Henry said brightly, oblivious to the frost in the air. Karen didn't move, didn't smile. She just stood there, staring at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "So," she finally said, her voice cold and clipped, "You're Amelia." I nodded, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Clark." She didn't take it. Instead, she turned to Henry. "You didn't tell me she was Indian." My heart dropped. Henry stiffened beside me. "Mom, what does that have to do with anything?" he said, his voice sharp. Karen sniffed, her eyes still on me. "I just think it's something a mother should know. Don't you?" The rest of the day was a slow-motion train wreck. Karen barely spoke to me during lunch, directing all her questions to Henry. When she did address me, it was always with a barbed edge. "So, Amelia," she said at one point, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "do your parents know how to use forks and knives, or is it all hands in your culture?" I stared at her, stunned. George choked on his drink, and Henry's face turned bright red. "Mom, that's enough," he snapped. Karen raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "What?" "I'm just curious. Cultural differences are fascinating." It didn't stop there. She found ways to insult everything, from the way I dressed. "Is that traditional?" she asked, wrinkling her nose at my floral maxi dress, to my job. "I work in marketing for a tech company, and when I mentioned it, she said, 'Oh, so you're one of those career women. I suppose that's why you're not married yet.'" After lunch, Karen insisted on giving us a tour of the house. She showed us room after room, each more opulent than the last, making little digs the whole time. "This is the family dining room," she said, gesturing to a massive table. "We host Thanksgiving here every year. It's quite the tradition. Of course, we'll have to see if Amelia can fit in." It was exhausting. But the worst part came when Henry went to help George in the garage, leaving me alone with Karen. We were sitting in the living room, and I tried to make polite conversation. "You have a beautiful home," I said. Karen smiled thinly. "Thank you. It's been in the family for generations. It's important to preserve heritage, don't you think?" I nodded, unsure where this was going. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Look, Amelia, I'm going to be honest. I don't think you're right for my son." I froze. "Excuse me?" "He's worked so hard to build a respectable life," she continued, ignoring me. "And I'm just not sure someone from your background would understand that." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "With all due respect, Mrs. Clark, I think Henry is the best judge of what's right for him." She snorted. "Oh, honey, men don't think about these things. They get swept up in novelty. But marriage is about compatibility, about shared values." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Henry and I love each other," I said firmly. "That's what matters." Karen waved a hand dismissively. Love is nice, dear, but it doesn't pay the bills. Or buy a house in a good neighborhood. Or get your children into private schools. I stared at her, stunned. Before I could respond, Henry walked back in, and Karen's demeanor shifted instantly. She plastered on a bright smile and said, "Oh, Henry, there you are. I was just telling Amelia how lovely it is to have her here." The drive home was silent. Henry kept glancing at me, guilt written all over his face. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I had no idea she'd be like that." "It's not your fault," I said, my voice shaking. "But, Henry, we need to talk about this. If she's going to treat me like this, I don't know how we can move forward." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll handle it. I promise." But deep down, I wasn't sure if he could. After the disaster of meeting Karen, my now future mother-in-law, I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. Boy, was I wrong. As Henry and I started planning our wedding, Karen managed to turn every step of the process into an uphill battle. And of course, her weapon of choice? Elizabeth, Henry's ex-girlfriend. Let me start from the beginning. Karen first brought up Elizabeth during one of our wedding planning sessions. Henry and I had invited his parents over to discuss guest lists. George was his usual warm self, nodding along as we explained how we wanted a small, intimate ceremony. Karen, however, had other ideas. "A small wedding," she said, her eyebrows shooting up. But Elizabeth always wanted a big one. "Remember, Henry?" She said a large wedding is the perfect way to celebrate love. I blinked. Who the hell was Elizabeth? Henry stiffened beside me. "Mom, Elizabeth and I broke up years ago. This is Amelia's and my wedding. We'll decide what's right for us." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "I just meant that Elizabeth had such wonderful ideas. You know, she's still single. I saw her at the country club last week. I clenched my teeth so hard I thought they might crack." "That's interesting," I said through a forced smile. "But we're happy with what we've planned." Karen smiled back, and I swear it was the kind of smile you'd see on a shark. "Of course, dear. I'm sure your vision will be lovely." After that, Karen found ways to insert Elizabeth into nearly every conversation. When we mentioned a catering company we liked, she said, "Oh, Elizabeth loved their hors d'oeuvres. I remember she said they were perfect for her dream wedding." When we talked about flowers, it was, Elizabeth always said white roses were the most elegant. It was maddening. Henry tried to shut it down whenever she brought it up, but Karen was relentless. She even went so far as to suggest inviting Elizabeth to the wedding. "She's practically family," she said with a shrug, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And you wouldn't want to hurt her feelings, would you?" I couldn't take it anymore. "Karen," I said, my voice tight, "this wedding is about Henry and me, not Elizabeth." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Of course, dear. I just thought you'd want to make everyone feel included." As the wedding drew closer, Karen's behavior escalated. She criticized every choice we made. The venue was too rustic. The menu was too modern. The colors were too loud. It didn't matter what we picked. She found a way to tear it down. One day, we were at a bridal shop, and I had just tried on the dress I knew was the one. I stepped out of the dressing room, beaming, and turned to Karen and my maid of honor, Lily, for their reactions. Lily gasped, "Amelia, it's perfect. You look stunning." Karen, however, pursed her lips. "It's nice. But don't you think it's a bit much for someone with your complexion?" Elizabeth always said that softer tones are more flattering. Lily looked like she was about to explode. "Karen," she said sharply, "Amelia looks beautiful. Let's leave it at that." Karen sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "Well, it's your day," she said, her tone making it clear that she thought I was making a mistake. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and I was determined not to let Karen ruin it. Henry and I had worked so hard to create a day that reflected us, our love, our values, and our future together. But Karen wasn't about to let that happen. She showed up wearing black. Not a subtle navy or charcoal, but jet black, complete with a dramatic hat and veil. It looked more like she was attending a funeral than a wedding. People whispered as she walked in. "Who wears black to a wedding?" someone muttered. I felt my stomach churn, but I forced myself to focus on the ceremony. Karen wasn't done. During the reception, she loudly criticized the menu, complaining to anyone who would listen. "Who serves quinoa at a wedding?" she said, her voice carrying across the room. "It's so pretentious." Henry overheard and pulled her aside, but it didn't stop her. She made snide comments about the decorations, the music, even the seating arrangement. "I can't believe you put George and me so far from the head table," she said. "It's like you don't value us at all." I tried to rise above it, but the final straw came during the speeches. Lily, my maid of honor, gave a heartfelt toast about our relationship, and as she finished, Karen stood up, uninvited, and cleared her throat. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, ignoring the shocked expressions around her. "First of all, congratulations to Henry Ann. Amelia." She said my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "Marriage is a wonderful journey, but it's also a serious commitment. I just hope you both understand the importance of hard work and sacrifice. After all, love alone isn't enough." The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react. Henry stood up, his jaw tight. "Mom, that's enough," he said, his voice cold. "Sit down." Karen looked taken aback, but slowly lowered herself back into her seat. The rest of the evening was tense, to say the least. "Hey, Reddit. It's me again." You'd think after the nightmare wedding, things might have calmed down. Nope. Karen found a way to take over our lives yet again, and this time, it was literal. She moved in with us. Yes, you read that right. She moved. And here's how it happened. It started with a phone call. Henry and I were having dinner, roast chicken with vegetables, something I thought I'd finally mastered, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "It's Mom," he said, already bracing himself. "Just keep it short," I muttered, trying to keep my irritation in check. I wasn't in the mood for another round of Karen-induced stress. Henry answered, and I could hear Karen's voice immediately, loud and frantic. "Henry, I can't stay here anymore. These neighbors are impossible. The police have been called 3 times this week, and it's not even my fault." She launched into a tirade about how her neighbor's dog barked too much, how another neighbor let their kids play too close to her garden, and how the entire neighborhood was out to get her. Henry looked at me, his eyes pleading, as he mouthed, "What do I do?" "Tell her to stay somewhere else," I hissed. But Karen wasn't giving him a chance to think. "I'm coming to stay with you too. Just until this all blows over," she declared. It wasn't a question. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," Henry tried, but Karen cut him off. "Nonsense. I'll pack my things and be there tomorrow." And just like that, the decision was made. The next day, Karen arrived with 3 suitcases and a scowl. "Well, this is cozy," she said, looking around our modest 2-bedroom apartment. Her tone made it clear she thought cozy was a euphemism for pathetic. "We're happy here," I said, forcing a smile. "It's just right for us." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she walked into the living room and ran her finger along the bookshelf. "Dust," she muttered under her breath. "I'll have to take care of that." I shot Henry a look, and he gave me an apologetic shrug. "It's just temporary," he whispered. "We'll get through it." Karen wasted no time making herself at home. By the end of her first day, she'd rearranged the living room furniture. "The flow was all wrong," she explained, as if that made it okay. When I came home from work the next day, I found her in the kitchen, tossing out my spices. "These are expired," she said without looking up. "And honestly, who needs this much paprika? I'll organize it properly." "That's not expired," I protested, grabbing the jar of cumin she'd just thrown in the trash. "I bought that last month." Karen sighed. "If you say so. But I've already made a list of what you actually need. I'll take care of it." I felt like I was losing my mind. Everywhere I turned, Karen was there, imposing her opinions and changing things without asking. My carefully curated apartment was quickly becoming unrecognizable. The worst part was the cooking. I've always loved experimenting in the kitchen, and Henry has been my biggest cheerleader, happily eating whatever I put in front of him. But Karen had other ideas. One evening, I made my favorite dish, chicken tikka masala, a nod to my heritage. I was proud of it. The spices were perfectly balanced, and the naan bread came out just right. But when Karen sat down to eat, she wrinkled her nose. "What is this?" she asked, poking at her plate like it was some kind of science experiment. "It's chicken tikka masala," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's one of my favorites." Karen took a tiny bite, then set her fork down. "It's interesting," she said. "But don't you think it's a bit too exotic for Henry? He grew up on simple, wholesome food. I think he'd prefer something more traditional." I looked at Henry, hoping he'd say something. Instead, he just sat there, staring at his plate. "It's fine, Mom," he finally muttered. "Amelia's cooking is great." Karen raised an eyebrow. "If you say so. But tomorrow, I'll make dinner. I have a wonderful meatloaf recipe that I'm sure you'll both love." True to her word, Karen took over the kitchen the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. I barely had a chance to cook anymore, and when I did, Karen would hover behind me, offering helpful suggestions. "Are you sure you want to use that much garlic? It can be overpowering, you know. Don't you think those vegetables should be cut smaller? Presentation is important. Maybe you should just let me handle it, dear. I wouldn't want you to stress yourself." It was infuriating. I started staying late at work just to avoid going home. But even that didn't stop Karen from finding ways to criticize me. One evening, I walked in the door to find her sitting with one of our neighbors, a sweet older woman named Margaret. "Amelia's finally home," Karen announced. "She works so much. Poor Henry barely gets to see her." Margaret frowned. "That's a shame. Marriage is about spending time together, isn't it?" I glared at Karen, who smiled innocently. "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it," she said. "I just worry about Henry. He's such a good man, and he deserves a wife who puts him first." The breaking point came when I found Karen in our bedroom. She was going through my closet, pulling out clothes and laying them on the bed. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Karen didn't even look up. "These outfits don't suit you, dear. You have such a lovely figure, but you hide it under all this fabric. I'm just helping you sort out what works and what doesn't." I was livid. "Karen, you can't just go through my things. This is my home." Karen finally looked at me, her expression calm and condescending. "Our home," she corrected. "And I'm only trying to help. You should be thanking me." I couldn't take it anymore. "Henry," I shouted. "Get in here." Henry appeared in the doorway, his face a mix of confusion and dread. "What's going on?" "She's been going through my things," I said, my voice shaking. "This has gone too far, Henry. She needs to go." Karen gasped, clutching her chest like I just insulted her ancestors. "I can't believe you'd speak to me like that after everything I've done for you." "Done for me?" I snapped. "You've done nothing but criticize me and take over my home. I'm done, Henry." "She has to leave." Henry looked back and forth between us, torn. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe it's time for you to go back home." Karen's face hardened. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "If that's how you feel, I won't stay where I'm not wanted." She left the room, but not before muttering, "I only hope you know what you're doing, Henry. Some people aren't worth the trouble." Karen moved out the next day, but the damage was done. My relationship with Henry felt strained, like we were both walking on eggshells. I didn't know if we'd ever get back to the way things were before she moved in. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to try. Hey Reddit, it's me again. Just when I thought Karen couldn't get any worse, she managed to hit a new low. This time, she didn't just criticize me or rearrange my life. She actively sabotaged me. I'm still fuming just thinking about it. Henry and I had been trying to settle back into some sense of normalcy after Karen's extended stay at our place. She had moved out, but her presence lingered like a bad smell. The constant criticisms, the meddling, it all left me on edge. So, when we invited her over for dinner to start fresh, I was determined to show her that I could hold my own. I decided to make an Indian feast, a proper one, filled with dishes that reminded me of home. I spent the entire day preparing. I went to the local Indian grocery store in the morning, stocking up on everything I needed. Spices like turmeric, cumin, and garam masala, fresh herbs, and vegetables. I even decided to make my own naan from scratch. Henry offered to help, but I wanted to do it myself. It felt important, like a way to reclaim my space and prove that I belonged here, no matter what Karen thought. When Karen arrived that evening, I greeted her at the door with a smile, determined to keep things civil. "Hi, Karen. Glad you could make it." She stepped inside, looking around like she was inspecting the place for dust. "Well, it's good to see you're keeping the house in order," she said, her tone neutral but with that familiar edge of disapproval. Henry, ever the peacemaker, appeared behind me and gave her a hug. "Come on in, Mom. Dinner's going to be great. Amelia's been working on it all day." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, what are we having?" "An Indian spread," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Chicken curry, saag paneer, chana masala, naan, the works." Karen's lips tightened. "I see. That's interesting." I chose to ignore her tone and led her to the living room, where Henry poured her a glass of wine. I returned to the kitchen to finish up, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. About half an hour later, I realized I needed some cilantro to garnish the curry. I'd left it in the fridge, so I went to grab it. That's when I noticed something was off. The spices I'd laid out on the counter, gone. The fresh vegetables I'd prepped, missing. Even the chicken I'd marinated earlier, nowhere to be found. My heart started racing as I opened cupboard after cupboard, searching for my ingredients. Instead, I found rows of canned green beans, plain pasta, and jars of marinara sauce that I knew I hadn't bought. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, yanking open the trash can. There it was, my chicken, my vegetables, my carefully measured spices, all tossed in with coffee grounds and eggshells. "Karen," I yelled, storming into the living room. "What did you do with my food?" Karen looked up from her wine, feigning surprise. "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. I thought it would be better to use more regular ingredients. You know, things Henry is used to." "Are you kidding me?" I said, my voice rising. "I spent all day preparing that meal. You had no right to throw it away." Karen raised an eyebrow, her expression infuriatingly calm. "I was just trying to help, dear. I thought you might appreciate a little guidance. Not everyone has a taste for such strong flavors." Henry stood up, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Mom, are you serious? You threw out Amelia's food?" "It wasn't suitable," Karen said matter-of-factly, "and I didn't want to embarrass her if the meal turned out poorly." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You didn't want to embarrass me? You've done nothing but embarrass me since the moment you walked in." Karen's expression hardened. "There's no need to be so dramatic. I've already taken care of dinner. There's pasta in the kitchen. It's simple, and everyone will enjoy it. No one asked you to take care of dinner." I snapped. "This was my meal, Karen. My effort. You had no right." Henry stepped in, his voice firm. "Mom, this is not okay. You can't just throw away someone else's food. Amelia worked hard on that." Karen shrugged, sipping her wine like she hadn't just completely upended my evening. "Well, maybe next time she'll think twice about serving such unusual food." The atmosphere for the rest of the evening was tense. Henry tried to salvage things by ordering takeout, but the damage was done. I barely touched my food, too angry and humiliated to eat. Karen, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered, chatting away like nothing had happened. When she finally left, I broke down. "I can't do this anymore, Henry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "She doesn't respect me, she doesn't respect my culture, and she doesn't respect our home." Henry pulled me into a hug, his voice soft but serious. "I know, Amelia, and I'm going to talk to her. This can't keep happening." The next day, Henry called Karen and laid down the law. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught snippets like, "You crossed the line, and if you can't respect Amelia, you're not welcome here." When he hung up, he looked at me, his expression resolute. "She's not coming back until she apologizes. Do you really think she will?" I asked, skeptical. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if she doesn't, that's on her. You're my priority, Amelia, not her." For the first time in what felt like forever, I started to feel like things might actually get better. But with Karen, I knew better than to let my guard down completely. If there's one thing she's good at, it's finding new ways to cause chaos. "Hey Reddit, it's me again. I wish I could say this is the last time I'll ever have to talk about Karen, but this time she crossed a line so unforgivable, it's left me shaken to my core. I don't even know how to process what happened, so I'm hoping writing it all out will help. It started about a week after Henry had laid down boundaries with Karen over the cooking incident. She hadn't contacted us since then, which was unusual, and part of me foolishly thought she'd finally gotten the message. But with Karen, peace is always the calm before the storm. One afternoon, I came home from work to find her car in our driveway. My stomach dropped. I hadn't invited her, and Henry hadn't mentioned anything about her coming over. I walked in to find her sitting on the couch, sipping tea like she owned the place. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "what are you doing here?" She looked up, her expression serene, but with that underlying smugness I'd come to despise. "Oh, Henry said it would be fine if I stopped by. I wanted to check on you too after everything." I didn't believe that for a second. "Henry isn't home," I said, placing my bag down. "You should have called first." Karen shrugged. "I didn't think I needed an invitation. We're family, after all." I didn't have the energy for a fight, so I went into the kitchen to decompress. That's when I noticed something odd. The shelf where I kept Sanjay's urn was empty. My heart stopped. I froze, staring at the bare space where the urn had always been, my mind racing. I looked around the room, hoping maybe I'd moved it and forgotten, but deep down I knew better. I spun around and marched back into the living room. "Karen," I said, my voice trembling, "where is Sanjay's urn?" She looked up, feigning confusion. "What urn?" "Don't play dumb with me," I snapped. "The urn that was on the kitchen shelf. My brother's ashes. Where is it?" Her face hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But instead of owning up, she doubled down. "Oh, that old thing? I got rid of it. It was just sitting there collecting dust. Honestly, it was a bit morbid. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room." You what?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Karen, that was my brother. Those were his ashes." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Amelia. It's not like you even looked at it half the time. I thought I was doing you a favor." I lost it. All the anger, all the frustration, all the pain I'd bottled up over the years came pouring out of me. "How dare you?" I screamed. "That was my brother. The only piece of him I had left. Who the hell do you think you are, throwing it away like it's garbage?" Karen stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Don't you yell at me in my son's house. You've been nothing but disrespectful since the day I met you, and I've had enough. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn, we wouldn't be in this mess." I couldn't even respond. My hands were shaking, and tears blurred my vision. I grabbed my phone and called Henry. He picked up on the third ring. "Amelia? What's wrong?" "It's your mother," I said, my voice shaking. "She threw away Sanjay's ashes." There was silence on the other end, and then, "She what?" "Come home. Now." Henry arrived 20 minutes later, and by then, Karen had retreated to the guest room, claiming she needed space from my hysterics. I was sitting on the couch, clutching one of Sanjay's old scarves and trying to keep myself together. Henry walked in, his face like thunder. "Where is she?" he demanded. "She's in the guest room," I said, my voice hollow. "She says I'm being hysterical." Henry stormed down the hall, and I followed, too angry to care about what came next. He threw open the door to the guest room, and Karen looked up from her phone, startled. "Mom," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Karen's eyes darted between us, and for the first time, she looked nervous. "Henry, I didn't mean—" "Don't even try to explain," he cut her off. "You threw away Sanjay's ashes. Do you even understand what you've done?" Karen stood up, her defensiveness returning. "I was just trying to help. That thing was depressing, and I thought—" "You thought?" Henry yelled. "You thought it was okay to throw away the remains of someone's family? Are you insane?" Karen's face twisted with anger. "Don't talk to me like that, Henry. I'm your mother. And Amelia is my wife," he shot back. "And you've disrespected her for the last time. Pack your things. You're leaving." Karen's mouth fell open. "You're kicking me out? For her? For her? For me? For us, Henry said, his voice firm. You've crossed every line, and this is unforgivable. Karen eventually left, but not without throwing one last tantrum. She accused me of turning Henry against her, called me ungrateful, and even threatened to cut him out of her will. None of it mattered. Henry stood by me, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same team. As for Sanjay's ashes, I spent hours digging through the trash, hoping against hope that Karen hadn't taken them somewhere else. By some miracle, I found the urn intact, buried under a pile of coffee grounds and old newspapers. I cleaned it carefully, my hands shaking the entire time, and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. I don't know what the future holds for us, but one thing is certain. Karen will never step foot in our home again. She's burned every bridge, and I'm done trying to build them back up. Some people are just toxic, and no amount of love or patience can fix that. For now, I'm holding on to the people who matter. Henry, my friends, and the memory of my brother. And I'm finally learning to let go of the ones who don't. Hey Reddit, it's Amelia again. If you've been following my ongoing saga with my nightmare mother-in-law, Karen, you'll know she's pushed every boundary imaginable. After the incident with my brother Sanjay's ashes, Henry and I finally kicked her out for good. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen found a way to make things even worse. This time, her true nature came out for everyone to see, and the fallout has been catastrophic. It all started about a week after we evicted Karen. Henry and I were doing our best to move on and rebuild some semblance of peace in our lives. We'd been spending time with his sister, Sarah, who'd always been supportive of us, though she tended to stay out of Karen's drama. Sarah had her own family, a husband named Greg and 2 kids, Ellie and Max, and was usually the voice of reason in the chaos Karen created. One Saturday, Sarah invited us over for lunch. It was a warm, sunny day, and we sat in her backyard while the kids played on the swings. "How are you two holding up?" Sarah asked, passing me a glass of lemonade. "Better," I said, glancing at Henry. "It's been quieter, at least." Henry nodded. "It's a relief not having to deal with her every day. But I still can't believe what she did." Sarah shook her head, her face serious. "I don't know how she could do something so cruel. It's unthinkable." We talked for a while about setting boundaries and focusing on our relationship. For the first time in weeks, I felt like things might actually get better. But later that evening, everything unraveled. Sarah called us the next day, her voice shaking with anger. "You won't believe what Mom just told me," she said. "What happened?" Henry asked, putting the call on speaker so I could hear. "She came over this morning, uninvited, of course," Sarah began. "And she was different. Smug. Like she wanted me to ask what was going on. I didn't take the bait at first, but then she started dropping hints about how she'd been wrongly accused, and how some people don't appreciate honesty. I finally asked her what she was talking about, and that's when she told me." "Told you what?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "She admitted," Sarah said, her voice rising, "that she threw away Sanjay's ashes on purpose. She said it was necessary to make a point." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "She what?" "She said Amelia's always been too sensitive, and that she needed to put her in her place." And then she laughed, like it was a joke. Henry's face turned red, his fists clenching. "She laughed?" "Yes," Sarah said. "She didn't even try to hide it. She said it was a lesson, and that you'd both thank her eventually." I couldn't speak. My hands were trembling, and tears welled up in my eyes. Henry took the phone off speaker and stepped into the other room, his voice low and angry as he continued talking to Sarah. I sat there, trying to process what I'd just heard. Later that evening, Sarah called again. "I need to tell you something else," she said hesitantly. "What now?" Henry asked, his voice weary. "Mom told Greg the same thing," Sarah said. "And Greg, being Greg, told everyone. The whole family knows now. Aunt Diane, Uncle Mike, even Grandma. They're all furious." "That's an understatement," I muttered, finally finding my voice. "She threw away my brother's ashes, Sarah. That's not just cruel. It's inhuman." "I know," Sarah said. "And they agree. Aunt Diane said she's never speaking to Mom again. Grandma called her and screamed at her over the phone. It's bad." "Good," Henry said sharply. "She deserves it." Over the next few days, the fallout spread like wildfire. Karen, ever the victim, tried to spin the story in her favor. She called family members, claiming we'd exaggerated and that she'd simply misunderstood what the urn was. But no one was buying it. Greg had recorded part of her confession to Sarah, and when he played it for the rest of the family, Karen's lies fell apart. Henry's cousin Beth, who had always been close to Karen, called us in tears. "I can't believe she would do something like this," she said. "I feel so betrayed." "You're not the only one," I said, my voice hollow. "She's hurt everyone." Karen didn't take the backlash quietly. She started sending us long, rambling emails, alternating between blaming us and begging for forgiveness. One message read, "Henry, I'm your mother. No matter what, that will never change. I did what I thought was best for you and your marriage. Amelia has manipulated you against me, and it's breaking my heart. Please, let's put this behind us and move forward as a family." I deleted it without responding. Henry didn't reply either. But Karen wasn't done. She showed up at Sarah's house one evening, demanding to see us. Sarah called to warn us, her voice shaking. "She's here, and she's not leaving." "What do you want me to do?" "Tell her we're done," Henry said firmly. "And if she doesn't leave, call the police." Sarah relayed the message, and Karen finally left, but not without a scene. According to Sarah, she stood in the driveway yelling, "You're all ungrateful. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." That was the last straw for Henry. He blocked her number, deleted her emails, and told the rest of the family we didn't want to hear anything more about her. It was hard, harder than I expected. Cutting ties with someone, even someone as toxic as Karen, feels like admitting defeat in a way. But it was also liberating. For the first time since meeting her, I felt like I could breathe. The family has mostly rallied around us. Sarah has been a rock, and even relatives who used to side with Karen have reached out to offer support. Aunt Diane sent me a handwritten note saying, "You deserve better, and so does Henry. Don't let her drag you down." I'm grateful for the support, but the wounds Karen left behind will take a long time to heal. Some days, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting her to show up and cause more chaos. But for now, she's out of our lives, and that's a victory in itself. Hey Reddit, it's Amelia again. A lot has happened since my last update, and while life has brought some incredible blessings, Karen still managed to make herself a part of the story. But this time, we refused to let her overshadow the joy we've found. Here's how everything unfolded. A few months after cutting Karen out of our lives, Henry and I discovered we were expecting. It was one of those moments that felt surreal. Seeing the 2 pink lines on the test, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I told Henry, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "We're going to be parents," he whispered, pulling me into a hug. "This is our fresh start." We decided to name her Lily. The name felt right, simple, beautiful, and full of hope. As the months passed, we threw ourselves into preparing for her arrival. We turned the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling it with all the tiny things that make you realize just how small a newborn really is. Sarah was our biggest supporter throughout the pregnancy. She helped plan a baby shower, brought me meals when I was too exhausted to cook, and even taught Henry how to assemble a crib after his first attempt ended with extra screws and a lot of swearing. For the first time in what felt like forever, life was good, peaceful. But then Karen found out. One day, a package arrived at our door. It was wrapped in pink paper with a card that read, "For my beautiful granddaughter. Love, Mom." Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with the name Lily. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. Karen hadn't changed. This was her way of trying to worm her way back into our lives. Henry was furious. "How did she even find out?" he asked, pacing the living room. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "But she's not part of this." Henry agreed, and we returned the package unopened. A week later, another gift showed up, a hand-knitted blanket with a note begging us to let her be part of Lily's life. It was exhausting. Every time I thought we'd drawn a firm line, Karen found a way to push it. After Lily was born, Henry and I made the decision not to inform Karen. The birth of our daughter was a deeply personal, joyous occasion, and we didn't want her negativity tainting it. Sarah and a few close friends were the only ones who knew when we went to the hospital. Lily arrived healthy and beautiful, with a shock of dark hair and the tiniest hands I'd ever seen. Holding her for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and purpose. When we brought her home, we fell into a rhythm that felt right for us. Late-night feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of quiet joy filled our days. I thought about how much Sanjay would have loved her and how he would have teased me about becoming a softie. It was bittersweet, but I promised myself I'd honor his memory in a way that felt true to who he was. To keep Sanjay close, I started a memory box. I filled it with letters, photographs, and little trinkets that reminded me of him. There was the scarf he'd given me on my last birthday, a copy of his favorite book, and a handwritten note he'd left me before leaving for college. It became my way of keeping him present, not just for me but for Lily. Someday, I'd tell her all about her uncle, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who always had my back, and who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Henry helped me build a shelf in the nursery for the box. It wasn't just a place for Sanjay's memory. It was a promise that our home would always be built on love and respect, not toxicity or control. It was a fresh start, a chance to create the family we wanted, free from Karen's influence. Karen eventually found out about Lily from another family member. She sent an email filled with apologies and pleas to meet her granddaughter. "I know I've made mistakes," she wrote, "but I deserve to be part of her life." We didn't respond. Actions have consequences, and Karen had made her choices. Protecting Lily from that kind of negativity wasn't just a decision. It was our responsibility as her parents. Now, as I write this, I'm sitting in the nursery, watching Lily sleep. The room is filled with warmth and light, and for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours, and we're building it on our terms. Sanjay would have been proud.